So over the A-level course, you are over component 1 expected to complete what's called a personal project. Now the personal project you'll need to choose your own theme for. Now we've had students choose lots of different themes of interest to them. We've had students choose things like landscapes, we've had students choose pattern, we've had botanical illustration, we've had themes to do with emotion, so this one was all to do with fear. And I'm going to show you just one example of a student's book where they completed the personal project. But the style is obviously unique to the student, and you can produce it in the style that suits you and focus on a theme that suits you. But over the personal project, what students have to do is really explore their chosen theme. Now this student looked at fear in relation to kind of childhood fears, and they explored artists that linked into that. So they started looking at artists that had got more of a naive style to actually start to think about how they might incorporate this childlike element into their work. And then they started to take ideas from the artist to develop their ideas. So they researched the artist in depth, they did studies exploring ideas within his work, they explored in particular his use of symbolism. They then went on to look at other artists that they could use to inspire their ideas. So they were looking at how Pablo Picasso used colour and how they could use colour to represent the emotions behind their fears. And again, researched those artists in depth, explored some of their styles and techniques, and then started to take some of those into their own work. Now as the student goes on, they start to do some further studies of their own work where they're actually doing their own drawings, exploring fear, working from imagery that they've collected, actually taking photographs to also develop their ideas, working in different materials to explore their theme as well, and looking at using text as well as imagery. Sometimes students choose to explore text with imagery as well. On these, they actually were looking at using photography and then actually illustrating the photographs and working on top of the photographs to develop their ideas. But the personal project is really about you looking at artists, exploring artists, and also looking at your own personal development and really exploring a theme in depth, trying out lots of different things to start to think about coming up with your own final outcome. Now as the student went on, because it was to do with themselves, they actually explored doing some pictures of themselves in different materials, and they started to look further at using text behind their imagery to relate back to the stories behind these fears. And as you go through, you can see they started to incorporate some darker elements as well, and some of those earlier illustrations from the artist to develop their ideas and get across this idea of fear. They looked at further artists that inspired them, that they really liked the style of, to take their ideas further. And you can see in their annotation, they reflect on what ideas they particularly liked and where they're going in terms of the experiments, what things are working well, and where they want to go next. This student started to experiment with photography as well as painting and drawing. You can really home in to what are your personal areas of strength and choose techniques that you really want to play around with to extend your final outcomes and come up with some really beautiful artwork. This student actually did some animated GIFs, so you can do artwork that's digital as well as kind of painterly or photography based. We've got some further photographs that they took themselves that they worked on top of. And then towards the end of this project, they actually looked at an installation artist, and it was from that they decided for their final outcome that they wanted to do an installation piece which was all based on fear. Within the installation piece, they actually developed a plan which incorporated the GIFs that they created. So they had some large blown up versions of the GIFs on the wall, and they also had a live recording of one of the GIFs playing on the wall. And inside this little suitcase were all personal items relating to their childhood and little books that they'd created with illustrations in as well, which kind of told about their fears really, and made people interact and kind of almost kind of get inside that personal moment of what that student felt like as a child experiencing these fears. So it was really meant to kind of really impact on how somebody else felt about their fears and interpreted the work, really. But that's just one example of a personal project, and you can see it's really detailed and it all kind of fits in with this idea of fear. And all of the artists that they've looked at, they've used to inspire their artwork and the final outcomes for the project.